I was standing in the conference room when I heard my own eulogy being delivered by the woman who'd spent 6 months preparing to replace me. She didn't know I was there. No one did. I'd returned 2 weeks early from what everyone believed was medical leave, slipping back into the building through a side entrance I'd used for years, and now I stood just outside the partially open door, listening as she described my leadership style as well-intentioned but ultimately unsustainable. The room was silent except for her voice. I recognized the cadence. It was mine. The pauses, the slight inflection on certain words. She'd studied me the way you study someone you're planning to erase. If you find yourself drawn to stories about power, silence, and the quiet cost of being underestimated, I hope you'll stay, because what happened next changed everything I thought I understood about loyalty. I stepped away from the door and walked toward the elevator, my footsteps absorbed by the carpet I'd chosen when we renovated 3 years ago. My hands were steady. My breathing was calm. But something inside me had already begun to shift, like a structure recognizing its own instability just before the collapse. My name is Mara Cole, and for 9 years, I built something I believed in. It wasn't a fortune or an empire. It was a mid-sized consulting firm called Ashford Sterling, specializing in organizational ethics and crisis management. We helped companies navigate scandals, rebuild trust, repair what seemed irreparable. I founded during the worst period of my life, right after my younger sister died, and I realized that grief either destroys you or teaches you how to hold contradictions without breaking. I chose the latter. I built Ashford Sterling on the belief that competence doesn't require cruelty, that strength can be quiet, and that the people you protect will protect you in return. I was wrong about that last part. The firm grew steadily. We were never flashy, never chased headlines. Our clients came to us because they needed discretion, intelligence, and results. I hired carefully. I mentored deliberately. I believed in creating a culture where people felt valued, not disposable. For years, it worked. Then I promoted Evan Rook. Evan joined us 4 years ago as a senior strategist. He was sharp, charming, and ruthlessly efficient. He understood power in ways I did not because I lacked it, but because I'd never been interested in wielding it like a weapon. Evan was. He just hid it well. He knew how to make his ambition look like dedication, his manipulation look like strategy. And I, in my belief that good work speaks for itself, gave him room to grow. 2 years ago, I made him Chief Operating Officer. 6 months ago, I went on medical leave. The leave wasn't voluntary, not really. I'd been experiencing severe migraines, memory lapses, episodes of vertigo that left me unable to stand. My doctor ordered a full neurological workup and insisted I step back immediately. I was terrified. I thought I might be dying. I thought I might lose everything I'd built, not to ambition or betrayal, but to my own body turning against me. So I left. I told the senior team I'd be gone for 3 months, maybe 4. I assured them the firm was in capable hands. I meant it. I trusted Evan. I trusted Victor Chen, our head of operations. I trusted Lena Mir, the junior analyst I'd been grooming for leadership. I believed they would hold the space I'd created until I could return. I was gone for 2.5 months. The migraines stopped. The vertigo faded. The neurologist found nothing catastrophic, just stress, overwork, and the delayed physiological cost of years spent holding everything together. She told me to rest, to reconsider my workload, to stop treating my body like it was optional. I listened. I rested. And then, 2 weeks before I was scheduled to return, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was hesitant, apologetic. It belonged to James Finch, a senior partner at one of our oldest client firms. He asked if I was feeling better. I said I was. He paused, then said, "Mara, I don't know if anyone's told you this, but there are some concerning changes happening at Ashford Sterling. I thought you should know." I asked him what he meant. He hesitated again, then said, "Evan's been telling people you're not coming back." He's been positioning himself as the new permanent leader. And he's made some decisions that don't align with the values you built this firm on. I thanked him. I ended the call. And I decided, very calmly, that I would return early and that I would not announce it. That's how I ended up standing outside the conference room, listening to my own professional obituary. I took the elevator down to the 3rd floor, where my old office was located. I expected to find it empty, waiting for my return. Instead, I found the door propped open and a woman I didn't recognize sitting at my desk. She was young, maybe 26, impeccably dressed, sorting through files that I knew contained sensitive client information. She looked up when I entered, startled. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but dismissive. "I'm Mara Cole," I said. Her face went pale. She stood quickly, knocking a stack of folders onto the floor. "Oh my God. I didn't know you were back." "Evan said you weren't," he said. "What did Evan say?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. She bent down to gather the scattered files, her hands shaking. "He said you'd resigned. That you'd decided not to come back. He said this was his office now." I didn't correct her. I didn't explain. I simply nodded, told her I'd be in touch, and walked out. I spent the next hour moving through the building like a ghost. I visited the bullpen where the junior staff worked, the break room, the archives. I listened. I observed. And what I found was a company I barely recognized. The junior staff looked exhausted, tense. Conversation stopped when I passed. People averted their eyes. In the break room, I overheard 2 analysts whispering. "Did you submit the revised report?" one asked. I did, but Evan rejected it. Again. He said it wasn't aggressive enough. Aggressive? We're supposed to be advising them on ethical recovery, not. I know. But he doesn't care. He told me if I couldn't deliver what the client wanted to hear, he'd find someone who could. I didn't interrupt. I filled a cup with coffee I didn't want and left. By the end of the day, I understood what had happened in my absence. Evan hadn't just taken my role. He'd dismantled the principles I'd built the firm on. He'd turned Ashford Sterling into exactly the kind of company we used to fix: ruthless, expedient, willing to prioritize profit over integrity. And he'd done it by telling everyone I wasn't coming back. That night, I sat in my apartment and made a list. Not of grievances. Not of betrayals. But of facts. Decisions Evan had made. Clients he'd misled. Policies he'd overturned. People he'd silenced. I didn't write it in anger. I wrote it the way I used to write cases: briefly, methodically, clearly, without emotion. The next morning, I returned to the office. This time, I didn't hide. I walked directly to Evan's office, my old office, and knocked. He looked up from his desk, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Surprise. Fear. Then it was gone, replaced by a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mara," he said, standing. "You're back early. We weren't expecting you." "I know," I said. He gestured to the chair across from him. I didn't sit. "I wanted to check in," I said. "See how things have been going." "Things have been great," he said smoothly. "Really strong quarter. The team's been incredibly productive." "I heard," I said. "I also heard you've been telling people I resigned." His smile faltered. "That's not it, there was some confusion. People were asking questions, and I didn't want to create uncertainty. I told them you were taking an extended leave, and that I was stepping in to ensure continuity. You told the woman sitting at my desk that I wasn't coming back." He exhaled slowly. "Mara, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "I don't," I said. "But I'm not here to argue. I'm here to observe." He frowned. "Observe?" "I'll be working remotely for the next few weeks," I said. transitioning back in gradually, as my doctor recommended. In the meantime, I'll be reviewing files, sitting in on calls, getting caught up. I'm sure you understand. He stared at me, calculating. Then he nodded. Of course. Whatever you need. I left his office and went directly to HR. I requested access to all internal communications from the past 2 months, emails, meeting notes, recorded calls. I framed it as a routine re-entry process. They gave me everything. I spent the next 3 days reading. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Evan hadn't just positioned himself as my successor. He'd systematically rewritten the narrative of my leadership. In emails to the senior team, he described my management style as overly cautious and resistant to growth. He suggested that my medical leave was actually a failure to adapt to the demands of modern leadership. He implied, without ever stating it directly, that I was a liability the firm had outgrown. And people believed him. Or at least, they didn't challenge him. I found an email thread where Lena Meir, the analyst I'd mentored, the one I thought I was preparing for leadership, had written, "I think Evan's right. Mara built something great, but maybe it's time for a new vision." I read that line 3 times. Then I closed my laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was personal. These were people I'd hired, trained, trusted. People I'd protected during their own difficult moments. And in my absence, they'd decided I was expendable. But I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply recognized, with a clarity I'd never felt before, that I was no longer trying to save what I'd built. I was trying to understand what it had become and who was responsible. The following Monday, I attended my first senior leadership meeting since returning. I arrived early, took my usual seat at the head of the table, and waited. Evan walked in first, stopped when he saw me, then recovered quickly and sat to my right. Victor Chen entered next, nodded at me with something that looked like relief, and took his seat. Then Lena, who couldn't meet my eyes. Then the others. 6 people total, all of whom had worked under me for years. Evan cleared his throat. "Mara, welcome back. We're glad you're feeling better." "Thank you," I said. He opened his laptop. "I thought we could start with a quarterly review, to bring you up to speed on where we are." "That would be helpful," I said. For the next 40 minutes, I listened as Evan presented a version of the company I didn't recognize. Revenue was up, he said. Client acquisition had doubled. Employee productivity had increased significantly. He clicked through slides filled with graphs and projections, his tone confident, almost celebratory. The others nodded along, occasionally adding comments of agreement. When he finished, he looked at me expectantly. "Any questions?" "Just one," I said. "How many clients have we lost in the past 2 months?" The room went silent. Evan's expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten. "We haven't lost any major accounts." "I didn't ask about major accounts," I said. "I asked how many clients we've lost." Victor shifted in his seat. Lena stared at her notepad. Evan paused, then said, 3. But they were smaller engagements, not strategic priorities. "And why did they leave?" "Client fit issues," he said smoothly. "Sometimes the relationship just doesn't align." I opened the folder I'd brought with me and pulled out 3 printed emails. I slid them across the table. "These are exit communications from those clients. Would you like me to read them aloud, or would you prefer to summarize?" Evan glanced at the emails but didn't touch them. His face remained neutral, but I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was deciding whether to deflect, deny, or concede. Before he could answer, I continued. "The first client left because we advised them to pursue an aggressive legal strategy that exposed them to regulatory scrutiny they weren't prepared for. The second left because we missed a critical compliance deadline. The third left because, and I'm quoting here, the firm no longer reflects the ethical standards we require in a partner." No one spoke. I let the silence sit. Now, I said, I'd like to understand how these decisions were made. Who authorized the legal strategy? Who was responsible for tracking the compliance deadline? And who communicated with the third client in a way that led them to question our ethics? Evan leaned back in his chair. Mara, I think you're overreacting. Every firm loses clients. It's part of doing business. You're right, I said. But we don't lose clients because we've compromised our values. That's not part of our business. Or at least, it wasn't. Lena finally looked up. Evan made those calls. We flagged concerns, but he overrode them. Evan's head snapped toward her. That's not accurate. It is, Victor said quietly. All eyes turned to him. He looked uncomfortable, but he didn't back down. We raised objections in multiple meetings. You told us that Mara's approach was too conservative, that we needed to be more aggressive if we wanted to grow. Evan's composure cracked, just slightly. We were trying to move the firm forward. Mara wasn't here. Someone had to make decisions. You weren't making decisions, I said. You were remaking the firm in your image. And you did it by telling people I wasn't coming back. That's not. I've read the emails, Evan. I've seen the meeting notes. You positioned my medical leave as a resignation. You told clients I'd step down. You reassigned my projects, moved into my office, and began dismantling every policy I'd put in place. And you did it because you thought I was too weak, too sick, or too irrelevant to stop you. His face flushed. You left. You walked away. What did you expect us to do, to wait indefinitely? I expected you to honor the leadership I built, I said. I expected you to protect what we stood for. I expected loyalty. He laughed, sharp and bitter. Loyalty? Mara, loyalty doesn't pay the bills. Loyalty doesn't win clients. You built a firm on idealism, and idealism doesn't scale. Then maybe you're working at the wrong firm, I said. The room went completely still. Evan stared at me, his expression hardening into something cold and defiant. Are you firing me? No, I said. I'm observing you. I'm documenting every decision you've made, every policy you've changed, every person you've silenced. And when I'm done, I'll let the board decide what happens next. He stood abruptly. The board trusts me. They've seen the numbers. They know what I've accomplished. They've seen what you've shown them, I said. But they haven't seen everything. Not yet. He left without another word. The others remained seated, avoiding eye contact. Finally, Victor spoke. Mara, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner. Why didn't you? I asked. He hesitated. Because I wasn't sure you were coming back. And I didn't want to lose my job for being disloyal to the person in charge. I looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. I understand. Lena cleared her throat. I'm sorry too. I thought maybe he was right. Maybe the firm needed to change. Change isn't the problem, I said. Betrayal is. I gathered my folder and left the room. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked quietly. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't make announcements. I simply reviewed files, attended meetings, and asked questions. I spoke with clients Evan had reassured, employees he'd intimidated, board members he'd charmed. I listened more than I spoke. And slowly, a picture emerged, not of a firm that had evolved, but of a firm that had been corrupted. Evan had convinced the board that growth required compromise. He'd framed ethical restraint as a competitive weakness. He'd told them that my leadership style was outdated, that the market had changed, that survival required a different approach. And because the numbers looked good on paper, they'd believed him. But the numbers were misleading. Revenue had increased because Evan had taken on clients we would have previously refused, companies facing serious ethical violations who wanted us to help them spin narratives rather than fix problems. He'd billed aggressively, cut corners on research, and pressured junior staff to work unsustainable hours. Productivity had increased because people were terrified of being fired. I compiled everything into a single document. I didn't editorialize. I didn't include my feelings. I simply presented facts, organized chronologically, with supporting evidence for every claim. Then I sent it to the board and requested a meeting. The meeting was scheduled for a Friday afternoon. I arrived 10 minutes early and waited in the conference room alone. The board members arrived one by one, 5 of them, all people who'd supported me when I founded the firm, all people I'd trusted to preserve its integrity. The chairman, David Marsh, sat across from me. He looked tired. "Mara, thank you for putting this together. We've reviewed your documentation." "And?" I asked. He sighed. "It's concerning. There's no question that Evan made decisions that deviate from your original vision. But the firm is profitable. Our client base has expanded. From a business perspective, he's delivered results." "At what cost?" I asked. "That's what we need to discuss," another board member, Patricia Lim, said. She was a former federal prosecutor, someone I'd always respected for her clarity and integrity. "Mara, I hear what you're saying. But I also see a leader who left during a critical period and is now returning to find that things changed in her absence. That's not unusual." "I didn't leave," I said. "I took medical leave. And Evan used that leave to tell people I'd resigned, to dismantle the culture I built, and to turn this firm into something I no longer recognize." David leaned forward. "What do you want, Mara? Do you want Evan removed?" I paused. I'd thought about this question for days. The easy answer was yes. But the real answer was more complicated. "I want accountability," I said. "I want the board to acknowledge that what happened here wasn't evolution, it was erosion. I want policies reinstated. I want the people Evan silenced to be heard. And I want a clear message sent that this firm's values are not negotiable." Patricia frowned. "And if that means losing revenue? If some of these new clients walk away?" "Then they walk away," I said. "Because if we keep them, we're not a consulting firm anymore. We're just another company willing to sell our integrity for profit." David and Patricia exchanged a look. Then David said, "We'll need time to deliberate." "How much time?" I asked. "A week," he said. "We'll reconvene next Friday." I stood. "One more thing. If you decide that Evan stays and I'm the problem, I'll resign. But I won't do it quietly. I'll make sure every client, every employee, and every industry contact knows exactly why I'm leaving. I won't burn the firm down, but I won't protect it either." David's expression tightened. "That sounds like a threat." "It's not a threat," I said. "It's a boundary." I left the meeting and went home. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept replaying the conversation, questioning whether I'd said too much or not enough, whether I'd been clear or combative. But by morning, the doubt had faded. I'd told the truth. Now I had to wait and see if the truth mattered. The week passed slowly. I continued working, attending meetings, and maintaining my composure. Evan avoided me. The staff whispered. Victor checked in twice, asking if I was okay. I told him I was. On Thursday night, I received an email from David Marsh. The subject line read, "Board decision, confidential." I opened it. The email was brief. The board had voted. Evan Rook would be removed as COO, effective immediately. A formal investigation would be conducted into his conduct during my absence. Policies he'd changed would be reviewed and, where appropriate, reinstated. The board apologized for not acting sooner. I read the email 3 times. Then I closed my laptop and sat in silence. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I felt tired, sad, and strangely empty. Because even though I'd won, I'd also lost something. I could never get back the belief that the people I trusted would choose integrity without needing to be forced. Evan was gone by Monday morning. No announcement, no farewell email, just an empty office and a terse message from HR stating that he'd transitioned out of the organization to pursue other opportunities. The staff knew better. Rumors spread quickly, some accurate, most exaggerated. I didn't correct them. I let the silence do its work. I spent that first week back in my office, the one Evan had occupied, removing traces of him. I found files he'd hidden, emails he'd archived, notes scribbled in margins that revealed just how calculated his strategy had been. In one document, dated 3 weeks into my medical leave, he'd written, "Create narrative of transition, not abandonment. Frame M's absence as an opportunity, not a crisis. The board needs confidence, not nostalgia." I filed it away with everything else. The atmosphere in the office had shifted. People were cautious around me, uncertain whether to apologize, explain, or simply pretend the past few months hadn't happened. Most chose the latter. I didn't push. I observed who came forward on their own and who waited to see which way the wind was blowing. Victor was the first. He appeared in my doorway Tuesday afternoon, looking uncomfortable. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. "Come in," I said. He sat across from me, hands clasped, staring at the floor. "I should have called you when things started changing. I knew it was wrong, and I didn't say anything." "Why?" I asked, not unkindly. "Because I was afraid," he said. "Evan made it clear that if you weren't coming back, anyone who opposed him would be sidelined. And I have a family, Mara. I have a mortgage and 2 kids in college. I couldn't risk it." I understood his fear. I didn't agree with his choice, but I understood it. "Thank you for telling me," I said. He looked up. "Are you going to fire me?" "No," I said. "But I need to know that if something like this happens again, you'll speak up. Even if it's hard. Even if it costs you something." He nodded slowly. "I will." "Then we're okay," I said. He left, and I believed him. Fear makes people do things they regret. The question is whether they learn from it. Lena didn't come to me. I went to her. I found her in the archives, sorting through case files. She looked up when I entered, and I saw guilt flash across her face before she could hide it. "Can we talk?" I asked. She set down the file. "Sure." I closed the door and sat on the edge of a table. "I read the email you sent. The one where you said maybe it was time for a new vision." Her face flushed. "Mara, I'm not here to make you feel worse," I said. "I'm here because I need to understand. You were one of the people I invested the most in. I thought we understood each other." She looked away. "We did. Just when you left, everything felt uncertain. Evan was so confident, so clear about what needed to happen. And I thought maybe he was right. Maybe I'd been too influenced by your way of doing things and couldn't see that there were other ways to succeed." "And now?" I asked. "Now I realize I was wrong," she said quietly. "I saw what happened to people who questioned him. I saw how he manipulated situations to make himself look good and others look weak. And I was too afraid to admit I'd made a mistake." "Do you still want to work here?" I asked. She met my eyes. "I do. But I understand if you don't want me to." I considered her for a long moment. She was young, talented, and she'd made a choice out of ambition and fear. Those weren't unforgivable sins. But trust, once broken, doesn't repair itself just because someone apologizes. "You can stay," I said. "But you're not on the leadership track anymore." "Not yet. You need to rebuild trust, and that takes time." She nodded, blinking back tears. "I understand." Good, I said, and left. Over the following weeks, I worked to stabilize the firm. I reinstated the policies Evan had dismantled. I reached out personally to the clients we'd lost and explained what had happened, offering them the option to return under renewed terms. 2 of the 3 came back. The third wished us well but said the damage was done. I accepted that. I also met individually with every junior staff member. I wanted to hear, in their own words, what the past few months had been like. What I learned was worse than I'd imagined. One analyst, a woman named Priya, told me she'd been berated in front of the entire team for pushing back on a client recommendation she believed was unethical. Evan told me I was naive, she said. He said if I couldn't handle the realities of the business, I should find another job. Another, a man named Marcus, described being forced to work 80-hour weeks with no additional compensation. He said it was temporary, that we were in a growth phase. But it never stopped. People were burning out, and he didn't care. A third, a junior associate named Sophia, told me she'd considered quitting. I came here because I believed in what you built, she said. And then you were gone, and everything changed. I didn't recognize this place anymore. I listened to all of them. I apologized for not being there. I promised things would be different. And I meant it. But I also knew that some damage couldn't be undone. People had been hurt. Trust had been broken. And even though Evan was gone, his impact lingered. The board called a follow-up meeting 4 weeks after their initial decision. This time, the tone was different. David Marsh opened by acknowledging that the firm had deviated from its founding principles and that the board bore responsibility for not intervening sooner. Patricia Lim was more direct. We failed you, Mara. We prioritized short-term results over long-term integrity. That was a mistake. I appreciated the honesty, but I also knew that acknowledgement wasn't the same as change. What happens now? I asked. We want you to stay, David said. Not just as a founder, but as CEO. We want you to lead the firm back to what it was. I'd expected this. I'd also spent the past month considering whether I wanted it. I'll stay, I said. But on 2 conditions. First, the board implements a formal oversight process to ensure that what happened with Evan can't happen again. I want checks and balances, not blind trust. Agreed, Patricia said. Second, I continued, I want full authority to rebuild the leadership team. That means hiring, firing, and restructuring as I see fit, without board interference. David hesitated. That's a significant amount of power, Mara. I know, I said. But if you want me to fix this, I need to be able to do it my way. If you can't trust me with that, then I'm not the right person for the role. They conferred briefly, then David nodded. You have our support. I left that meeting feeling something I hadn't felt in months, hope. Not the naive kind I'd carried when I first built the firm, but a harder, clearer version. I knew now that idealism without vigilance was just vulnerability. I'd learned that the hard way. Rebuilding took time. I let go of 2 senior staff members who'd been complicit in Evan's changes and unwilling to acknowledge it. I promoted Victor to a revised COO role, with clear boundaries and accountability. I moved Lena to a client services position where she could prove herself without having authority over others. And I hired 3 new seasoned professionals who shared my values and had the spine to defend them. Slowly, the firm began to feel like itself again. Clients noticed. Employees relaxed. The tension that had permeated every conversation started to lift. But I'd changed. I was more careful now, more watchful. I didn't assume loyalty. I didn't take trust for granted. I built systems to protect the firm from the kind of erosion Evan had caused, and I accepted that vigilance was now part of my job. 6 months after Evan's departure, I received a LinkedIn message from him. It was brief, almost cordial. He'd taken a position at a competitor firm, he said. He wished me well. He hoped there were no hard feelings. I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. There was nothing to say. He'd made his choices. I'd made mine. And I'd learned that some people see power as something to hoard, manipulate, and exploit, while others see it as something to steward, share, and protect. I chose the latter. I always had. The difference now was that I understood the cost. One evening, I stayed late at the office, something I rarely did anymore. The building was quiet, the hallways empty. I walked through the space slowly, noticing small things. The artwork we'd chosen together as a team, the worn spot in the carpet outside the conference room, the way the light hit the windows at sunset. This place had nearly been taken from me. Not by force, but by calculation. By someone who saw my absence as opportunity and my trust as weakness. And for a while, I'd questioned whether I'd been foolish to build something on principles that could be so easily dismantled. But standing there, in the place I'd created, I realized something. The firm hadn't been dismantled. It had been tested. And it had survived not because of me, but because enough people still believed in what it stood for. That belief had been buried under fear and pressure and Evan's relentless ambition. But it hadn't disappeared. It had waited, quietly, for someone to defend it. I'd spent months thinking I was fighting to reclaim what I'd lost. But I hadn't lost anything. I'd simply had to prove, to myself and to everyone else, that the values I'd built the firm on weren't just ideals. They were standards worth protecting, even when it was hard, even when it cost something, even when no one was watching. I turned off the lights and locked the door behind me. As I walked to my car, I thought about all the things I'd learned in the past year. About betrayal. About power and restraint. About the difference between leading and controlling, between trust and naivety, between forgiveness and accountability. And I thought about the person I'd been when I started this firm, young, hopeful, convinced that doing good work was enough. I wasn't that person anymore. I was sharper now, more cautious, less willing to assume the best in people without evidence. But I was also still standing. Still leading. Still building. And that, I realized, was its own kind of victory. Not the loud, triumphant kind. Not the kind that gets celebrated or recognized. But the quiet, steady kind that comes from refusing to let fear or betrayal or exhaustion determine who you become. I drove home through the city, watching the lights blur past, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because I'd fought for what mattered and won. Not against Evan, but against the belief that integrity was a luxury I couldn't afford. It wasn't. It never had been. And as long as I was leading, it never would be. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. And when I woke the next morning, I didn't feel the weight of what I'd lost. I felt the clarity of what I'd protected. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would do it again. If you've ever had to fight quietly for something you built, or felt invisible in a place where you once mattered, I hope this story reminded you that your worth doesn't disappear just because someone tried to erase it. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need permission to protect what's yours. I'd love to hear your story. Have you ever had to reclaim your space, your voice, or your dignity? Share it in the comments if you feel comfortable. Sometimes just saying it out loud helps. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you'd like more stories like this, family dynamics, betrayal, growth, and the quiet victories that change everything, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Remember, silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's survival. And sometimes, it's the beginning of your comeback. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next story.